Hello. Oh, so responsive. I love it. I wanted to introduce you to a place you probably do not know you are in right now, which is the heteronormative matrix, okay? That's where you are right now, and I am thrilled to be your tour guide. As Dr. Ali said, my name is Elliott, and we're going to be moving and meandering our way through the heteronormative matrix today, okay? So please note the emergency exits, okay? And also that, per usual, someone who is vulnerable to the impacts of heteronormativity must also bear the burden of educating the unaware majority. Okay, lovely. So we're first going to need to go over some concepts that are critical to our tour today. Consider these your safety regulations, okay? Not available in the seat pocket in front of you. Sorry, budget cuts. Chief among these would be heteronormativity. Now, what am I talking about when I say heteronormativity? I am talking about the widely accepted and normalized belief that heterosexuality, predicated by sex as assigned at birth, is the default, and thus, relationships between opposite sexes are most fitting. Now, we could never hope to untangle these heteronormative ideals from our daily lives because they are so normalized, which is why I chose to introduce this topic to you through the metaphor of the Matrix, pulled from the popular 1999 premiering sci-fi trilogy. We follow our hero, Neo, as he discovers that all of humanity is unknowingly trapped in a simulated reality called the Matrix, which is very casual if you ask me. You look surprised. You didn't know your entire reality was constructed and defined for you? Don't panic. It's okay, I understand. In the words of Morpheus, our immortal deity from the Matrix films, I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up. No alarm clock here. This tour is just beginning. Now, we have to take care of some more business. I cannot allow you to navigate the heteronormative matrix unlabeled, okay? Consider the heteronormative matrix a stuffy and painful networking event. We've all been to those, right? That may have been what intermission was like for you, okay? And you all have to wear a name tag. And I'm sorry, but that name tag has to detail every single one of your identities, yet someone else gets to pick those for you. Real. What if you don't identify with your sex as assigned at birth? What if you don't check every single box necessary to adhere to a particular gender? What if you experience attraction to people that would not be perceived as identifying as the sex opposite of yours? Well, my friends, you might just be a little queer. Now, I must warn you, identifying as queer is not welcome in the heteronormative matrix. That's not because people don't care about you. It's simply because the system was not designed with you in mind. And nobody can replace the system. Now, we've talked about heteronormativity, so what is queer? As an adjective, it can describe something odd or strange, but as a verb, it illustrates the action of spoiling or ruining something. And that I like. Yet, when we consider the relatively recent cultural revolution around the word queer, I think the second definition is more fitting. Queerness is here to spoil and ruin everything you have been taught to believe about gender, gendered expression and sexuality, and the myriad of ways in which heteronormativity infiltrates our daily lives and our society. While as an identity, queer can encompass many things, theoretically, something must exist in a state of total normalcy or acceptance to be influenced by queerness. Don't worry. Here in the heteronormative matrix, we work aggressively to protect you from such queer influences. You are safe. If you haven't caught the gist by now, queer is a dirty word, okay? And I say that even as somebody that works with college students on a daily basis and have seen this celebration around the reclamation of the word queer. And even when I see it in such a positive light every day, it still irritates something deep down inside of me. It still stings like a synonym for weird or lesser or other or targeted or threatening. And it still echoes like school hallways and reverberates with the judgment and discrimination of peers of mine that are considered to be socially dominant. If we could somehow remove the stigma and lift the social pressure around the permission to be more queer, I have a feeling that it would feel something like coming up for that first breath of fresh air after you've spent a long time underwater, just to prove to your friends that you could. If we could somehow remove the stigma and lift the social expectations and reprogram the norms, the exception might just become the rule. Queerness is the antibody to the heteronormative condition, and stories of queer success are battle cries in an ongoing resistance. However, living in violation of the heteronormative matrix is not safe, and thus there are a few other things you should know. The heteronormative matrix is non-threatening to most, unfriendly for some, but for the most vulnerable can be deadly. Here in the heteronormative matrix, for queer young people aged 18 to 24, suicide is the second leading cause of death. The average life expectancy of a transgender woman of color is 35 years old. 1/3 of transgender Americans report eating and drinking less to avoid having to use a public restroom. 40% of homeless young people are queer. And 70% of those queer young people that are homeless identify as Black or Latino. And at the present moment, there are just north of 300 active hate groups just here in the Southeast. While the matrix is fake, the hate and impact generated by heteronormative culture is very real, even if the rules it is based upon are not. So you might be thinking, what rules? Well, if I ask you to think about what it means to be a man or a woman, you may think of a childhood movie or television show or a youthful crush or some key element of your upbringing. But you most likely do not think of this omnipotent, omniscient, universal truth giver, because that doesn't exist. When I ask you to think about where you learned these things, and if you've ever been confronted by transgender identity and had that little voice in the back of your head that said, I wonder if that person is a real man or woman. Who decides? Because if it is our Division of Motor Vehicles and their related identity documents, I think we are all doomed. Now, if it feels like this tour is attacking everything you know about living as a gendered and sexual person, it probably is. Okay? You'll be just fine. As we learned early on in the Matrix, the system defines reality for a lot of people. It is that system that is the enemy, not necessarily the people. And as we also hear in the immortal words of Morpheus from the Matrix films, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. They are so inured, so hopelessly dependent on the system that they will fight to protect it. Now, we are all programmed to believe certain things and take certain things as universal truths. But we have to think about the dangerous part of that. And the dangerous part of that is when we are not questioning every identifiable sign that our society was built for some and not for all. And we need to remember that. For many guests on our tours of the heteronormative matrix, they first have to unlearn before they can relearn. So much of what we are taught is divisive, and it programs our conscious and unconscious bias whether we want it to or not. chances are you are statistically more likely to be nodding your head in agreement with me right now because you perceive me to be a man. Only my mother found that funny. Now, we are nearing the end of our tour. I know, it's a sad day for me too. So I must ask you to make a choice. An active choice as to how you are going to move on living your life from this place. You may feel like this is a whole lot for you, and you might feel like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. And luckily for you, because of how the system works, you can write my talk off as the musings of an overworked, underpaid, progressively liberal snowflake, and you will wake up tomorrow believing that. Or you can take the last 10 minutes as permission and encouragement to consider the system. Consider this idea of the heteronormative matrix and think about the ways you might be able to live your life just a little differently for the betterment of people who may identify differently than you do. When we know better, we can do better. And when we unlearn, we can relearn. I encourage you to find spaces where you are the minority, especially if you have never experienced that before. I encourage you to listen more than you speak, particularly if your identities allow you to speak more than others. Yes, church. I want you to feel encouraged to do research around identities you do not understand. And I want you to question everything, especially if you have never had to worry about simply sitting and existing safely in a space because of one of your identities. I want you to tell your story, and I want you to encourage other people to tell theirs too, because if you don't, one will be written and told for you. And lastly, I want to encourage you to get a little queer today. And I don't mean who you love, right, or who you are, but in terms of challenging that little voice in the back of your head that probably sounds a whole lot like the heteronormative matrix we toured today. Challenge that. Dig deep below all of those socially constructed expectations down to the most authentic version of yourself. LGBTQ+ or not, living without apology in our current world is a direct assault on a system that prescribes everything from who we love to how we dress. And that, my friends, is beautifully queer. Now, on your way out, the gift shop is on your right, okay? And for your convenience and affirmation, everything down to the writing pens for sale has been segregated by biological sex. Have a lovely day.